Tristan Dehaan. Welcome to David Anderson Talking Market Data. It's a bit strange talking on this podcast because you and I talk so much anyway, because we're close colleagues and have been close colleagues over the last few years, really. But it's a pleasure to actually have you on the show, showbiz and all that.
Yeah, thank you.
So as I say with all my guests, I will put your LinkedIn profile on the description so people can look at that in detail. But I think it is worth going over your illustrious career so far. And again, just to set the scene, this is important for both of us. We both do work with FISD, but on this particular occasion, this is David Anderson and Tristan Dehaan in our individual capacities and our individual thoughts and views of the world of market data. And I think even, a big chunk of your experience, as with mine, has been in the FISD world, but there was life before FISD. And I got to know you actually when you were working for user firms, consumer firms in FISD speak. Tell me a little bit about your career, your experience, your relevance and credibility in a market data world before you got involved in the heady world of FISD.
Okay, thanks very much, David. Do you want me to go before market data?
No, I think
stick to the market data.
Just stick to the market data. Yeah,
cool.
There's plenty of that.
So, I think my beginning in market data is not that much unlike other people's experience, as in I was thrown into a market data team because I was managing outsourced services on a custodial side. And my manager said, if you can handle relationships, you can do market data. And of course, I'm always curious. And before I take on board something, I would like to understand what it is. And I asked my manager, can you give me some more detail? And he went, no, I don't know much about it. And that is such a typical thing. So in the beginning, we had to, because...
Which firm was that and where was that?
That was at Robeco.
Right.
And that would have been...
in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So Robeco is one of the largest asset management companies and probably one of the first to be involved in ESG before ESG was a thing.
I remember you were one of the people who introduced me to ESG, environmental, social and governance. I mean, that's exactly 10 plus years ago, 10, 12, 15.
It's beyond that even, because I think I've originally was a member of FISD through Robeco.
Yeah.
Probably.
That was Athens, 2009.
Exactly. So I think we're going back like 16, 17 years.
Crikey. Doesn't time fly?
It does. And I would say, and it is fun. Market data is fun. I always call it a sport. But just to quickly to go through my career. So I worked at Robeco, and that's where I started off in market data. And FISD for me was an education. So it was a bit like a university, because every time I went there, I would pick up more knowledge, but also importantly, I would extend my network and I'd find out people with common issues that my firm faced, but also learning about what was coming down the pipe that I was not aware of. So it really, really helped me. And I actually, would like to pay tribute that there were quite a few people that were teachers of the art who I clung on to, and they, all taught me different facets, which really helped me become more rounded and understand and become a
quick pause, just in case anybody out there doesn't know what we're talking about with FISD. FISD is, if you will, the trade association for all corners, all parts of the global market data industry. And if anybody wants to look that up, go to www.fisd.net. But onwards, sorry, I interrupted.
No problem. I would also echo, there are events out there where you can learn about market data, and this will probably come across as very biased, but FISD, stands alone in terms of...
Stands tall.
It stands above everybody else, because I think they were the original market data group. I don't know if that's factually true, but I think they've been in the business for a long, long time. But they certainly have all the big firms there. And it's not just events. Okay, so it's also all the group meetings that you have during that period that helps build those relationships. And as I said, that really helped me grow. And I worked in market data for Robeco for about another 10 years, and then going on to Aegon Asset Management, where I
Another
did
Dutch, another
another
Dutch.
touch. Yeah, because for people who don't know, I live in the Netherlands, although I'm originally from London. Started off in the financial industry in the UK, and therefore when I went overseas, which was with an opportunity with an American bank, I brought these skill sets, which at the time were scarce, because market data is
Well,
very.
actually, I mean, we're going to now segue into our conversation about market data, and there are a million things we could talk about. We chatted beforehand about some of them, but actually, what you just said, I haven't given you any warning on this, but it's just, I mean, I remember when I was working in market data, London and New York are the real focal points. Those are the big financial centers for the capital markets. But it begs an interesting question: what happens outside of London? There is life outside London. There are the capital markets outside of London. Now, you've worked, I think, in Luxembourg and then more recently in the Netherlands. But I think interestingly as well, you took over my role of looking after Europe, even plus the Middle East and Africa. Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your observations? What are the differences between, if you can, between what you see in London and what you see in the Netherlands or Madrid or Zurich or other centres, Dubai, where you ran an event sort of last year? I mean, what's going on outside of London?
Well, years ago, so when I started with FISD, there was definitely a disconnection. So London, I mean, I didn't go over to New York for FISD events. Oh, I think maybe one time I did, but I did notice that the knowledge was at a lower level within Europe, but also the world was a little bit less connected back then. But my vendors were London based, most of them.
Yeah.
So they come across with all their savvy and swift, ways of doing things, which can catch market data vendor managers off guard, and the business and the data management groups, etc. So definitely the knowledge levels. So that would have been the biggest thing. But also, and this is quite interesting, and I feel that if you're outside those main financial city hubs, you're not as high on the radar for things like data compliance and audit. You see them a lot less. I hope I'm not waking sleeping giants, but it's a fact. And of course, there's many more ways to do an audit. You don't have to do an in-person audit anymore. But I think that still is the case. And sometimes what that does is, although that can make you sit comfortable, it also makes you lazy, and you think that you don't have to deal with certain issues. If you think, well, what's the point of me investing time if I'm not ever going to use that situation? But also your skill sets get sharper when you are tested. So I think that's the main difference. And the second one I would probably say is, if New York and London are screaming for, oh, where's the next generation of market data people? Imagine in Europe, even less, even harder. I think that unless you take somebody from another firm within market data, so it could be on the vendor side, etc., you have to start from scratch. So it's not about the experience; you're looking for skill sets. Then
And I
people.
think that is an observation. I mean, I've even seen that in London and New York, that there's a shortage of this pool of market data people. But you're right, that is accentuated even more if you're in, frankly, and I don't want to be diminishing here, but these are smaller centres. If you're talking about Rotterdam, Amsterdam, if you're talking about Zurich, if you're talking about Stockholm, these are smaller centres. There's a smaller pool of people that are working there, and therefore, I mean, I think it's fair to say that people probably stick in their jobs longer because there's less opportunity to bounce around. Is that a fair observation?
Yes, but also for younger people to come in and then are looking at what they're doing, they realize there's a a time period where they may think, if I'm going to change, I need to change now. So for some, they do a mid-career change and go into another part of the business because they also realize that there is a ceiling of how far they can grow in market data within their organization. So as an example, in many customer firms, there's no CDO.
Yeah.
It's a rarity. I'm still surprised. Um, but the other people who have passed this, get past their 40s, maybe sometimes a bit fearful of can I change and relearn and succeed further. So not only do you have a shortage of experience, but the experience sometimes goes out quicker across Europe than London, maybe, where London you've got loads of roles and you can be global head of market data. Again, I'm just talking from the customer side, but if you want to switch over to the vendor side or exchange side and experience that, that's what the market data is, a whole thing within the company.
Well,
So the
and I,
skills are much more transferable.
and I think it's good and interesting that we started off with the sort of human, personal dimension of careers in market data. You and I have talked about this a lot. We've been very involved as well in the sort of educational side. It's something that I'm very sort of hot on, but you've been very hot on that as well. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to watch. I mean, there's another observation I would make, another change that's happened in the last few years. I think a lot of the low level jobs that used to take place in London possibly would take place in Rotterdam as well. But a lot of these have been outsourced slash offshored to centers of excellence, the Bangalore's, the Hyderabad's, or the Manila in the Philippines, or even I think I was out in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So now that's a good thing. And I know the people who work in those centers are very keen to sort of say, look, we're not just cheap labor, it's not just low cost, there's lots of efficiencies from these centers. But one thing it does is when entities in London or in Rotterdam sort of want a mid-level person, and they would normally recruit that from the up and coming, starter people. Those starter people are not in Rotterdam or London. So I don't know. I don't know if the Dutch companies have offshored much. I know a lot of the
No, yeah, because again, when you talk about the firms that do offshore, they have large market data teams.
yeah,
We're talking about tier ones
yeah,
and maybe a few tier twos, but in the Netherlands, these teams are not big enough.
yeah,
I mean, you can count them on the amount of staff in market data on one hand, and you're lucky if you get to five.
yeah. It's a
So
different.
what is common, how the consumer firms in Europe fill those spaces is, and to bring in expertise, is consultancy is quite popular. There's a few key consultants in the
Yeah,
Netherlands, and they just go round and round and round the same firms.
yeah. Look, let's segue. So we talk the human dimension, the HR dimension, staffing, and what have you. Let's go into themes. I'll throw a couple of themes at you, but I want to hear what you see and hear, both in your pre-FISD career, but again, one of the beautiful things that both of us have gained working with FISD is you get to hear so much. You get to see what everybody else's themes and issues are. And I think some of the things that I've seen out there, I mean, the one thing that has come up on my podcast so many times is the sheer complexity and diversity of data licenses, the licensing structure, the terms and conditions for data and whatever. And I think this has been an eternal problem. Number one, the complexity. They're in their own right. Each individual contractual term can be really complicated to understand. But then that is accentuated, amplified by the fact that 300 firms, exchanges, for example, all have different complicated terms. So each one is complicated. That's hard enough. But then if you have 300 different complicated ones,
Mhm.
that seems to have created a bit of a nightmare for the industry. So that's one thing I've been aware of. Another thing I've been aware of is, technology. It was cloud originally, but now it's shifted to AI. But I think the two are linked. There's a lot. I mean, gosh, we're talking about AI like we have done for the last 4 or 5 years, and we were talking for cloud probably for the last 10 years before that. Um, and then there's lots more, but the other big one that I'm aware of is the whole sort of regulatory stuff, and I know you've been involved in that. So those are just 2 or 3 that I'm aware of. Are those the same for you, or there's some other ones thrown in there? And we can dig into some of these.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't get away from contract language. Again, going back to when I started in FISD, I think one of the first events in London I attended, I was, because I didn't know anybody, I think I was at the back of the room and somebody started talking to me, and the conversation, the topic was around, contract language and everything. And this guy looked at me, shrugged his shoulders and said, "We've been talking about this for 10 years." And I thought, okay,
And that was
that's
15 years ago. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, we're still talking about it. I mean, I joke about this, but the dirty word in our industry is standards, right?
But
It's
what?
it's
Let's
something that people always push away. On the consumer
Because
side,
it's
also,
proved so difficult. I mean, standards are a nirvana. They're this lovely idea, but nobody, including us at FISD, including you and I as individuals, have been able to persuade the entities out there to standardize on something. Why haven't we
I
succeeded?
I I think, and this is just purely my opinion. I think people, from the vendors and exchange side, are worried that that will reduce their commercial opportunities.
The ability to be flexible, to change and pivot and
Yeah.
be different. Yeah,
And when I talk about standards, I mean, it would be utopia if, I mean, you're buying data from an exchange. Why can't they all have the same contracts? But okay, that's utopia. That's not going to happen in our lifetime, right? But it would be nice if the definitions meant the same.
yeah,
That would make it easier. So they have different definitions. And as you probably remember, when I started getting involved with FISD, still as a member, and I got involved with the consumer constituency group, and then I was very fortunate enough to be voted on the Exco. That was a big privilege for me because you're voted by your peers. But I came up with an initiative like, okay, our biggest challenge is understanding these contracts, and then
crisp,
there you
crisp.
go,
I remember
you
it.
go, yeah.
So tell me what crisp was. And look, it's a harsh thing for me to say. Why did it fail?
Yeah. In a tiny, tiny way, it didn't fail
Okay,
because
that was harsh for me.
no, it did fail in what I was trying to achieve. So just for listeners, what I was trying to achieve on really for the industry in a way was we respect that there are contracts out there that you do not want to change. But understand if there's little me, trying to inform my business internally, what are the rules, or at least the main rules to be aware
Little
of.
you sitting in a customer firm. So you as a
Yes,
customer firm person
correct,
on the
correct.
receiving end of all these contracts.
So what's our service suppliers have to realize is that if I am their contact point where they will give me a contract, I am not the user of the end data. We have our data management group that just scrubs and cleans data, but they're still not the end user. They have to then pass it on into the data engines and where it then gets absorbed by the business, different groups. And so my question always was, when I reviewed a contract is, okay, I'm not clear on this. I don't understand this. And what I would like to do if I was speaking to a vendor or an exchange is, can you help me communicate the important information so that we as a company are compliant with the contract? A very respectful thing to ask, I think, a normal thing. If you buy any product, it should always come with an instruction manual.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and what I was asking for, I guess in a way, or what I was trying to do was like an IKEA assembly.
So what was crisp stood for something? Do you remember?
Yeah, so that was contracts that are readable, intuitive, and a standardized protocol. So trying to make it easy is like, if I get your contract, okay, and I don't, we never, so this is important for vendors and exchanges if they don't know this already. The business never sees the contract. Rarely, never. If somebody comes forward and says, well, I share it, you're a one-off. They're not interested. All they want is like, give me the tool, give me the data so I can play and use it. So it's very important that, market data vendor managers explain to the business, okay, here it is, but just be aware that you shouldn't do ABC. As sometimes we talk about the do's and the don'ts. If you focus on the don'ts, it's endless. It's
Yeah.
endless. So just pick a few of the main things where things can go wrong. And so what Chris was, it was a one pager because time is of the essence for everybody that would summarize the main things. And so I created a work group within FISD on the consumer side, the CCG, and we brainstorm through what are the main points and the language that we should use. So we doing one page was very, very important, short and sharp, right? And to the point. And so all I wanted to do was, so we shared within this group, we took a few standard contracts from, the typical products that many businesses use. And we would like write these, fill it in ourselves to test proof the case. And then I spoke to some of my account managers at vendors, and they were like, "Yeah, I can't sign this." And I said, "Could you take it back?" Sure, I'll take it back. I think it went into the bin within as soon as it
I mean,
outside.
was it in essence you were trying to do a summary, a sort of
Yeah,
this long? Because I've had the same conversations with exchanges. Well, any data, somebody selling data, and I think that I've noticed is when you try and summarize, they say, well, it's all well and good you summarizing, but at the end of the day, the final word is the contract.
so yeah, you're absolutely correct. So what I was very aware of some of the feedback I was getting, like, no, our contract is a contract, and then if we agree to this, then it could legally used against us. And I said, no, we're right on there, clear wording that this is a summary and the contract is always leading. All
Yeah.
right, we put some of that terminology in, and but I said the whole purpose is just so we stay compliant. Do you want us to be compliant? Help us to be compliant. And I said, but there's no point me writing these summaries, giving it to the business, and you have never verified it at any point. Okay. And so all I wanted not was a sign off, but at least say, yes, you've understood it and we're fine with it. And maybe I was asking too much is, well, if there would ever be an audit that this should be considered, how I've informed the business with your knowledge. And that was maybe a step too far. And so not only did it fail with vendors and exchanges, so I couldn't get, the volume. But then also the consumer said, well, if you can't get the approval from them, what's it worth? We'd be doing this and we could be misleading our business. And that's what failed. And so when you ask me also, what are one of the things that I notice and is a definite frustration for me is communication in our industry. Why is it that we put out contracts and we're not clear about it? And I spoke internally to my lawyer back in those days, and I said, "Do you understand the language?" And she said to me, "No." And I said, "Does that mean that it can be legally valid?" And she said, "Oh yes." She said, "With that, if things were clear in life, we wouldn't have lawyers in the world." I mean, I
Because
said to
yeah,
her,
it's
"What?"
all about
So
interpreting,
that
isn't
wouldn't
it?
be a bad thing, would it?
Yeah, yeah. But well, so I mean, jumping ahead. I mean, this has gone on and on and on. Other people I know have tried to do these sort of summarizations. I think one of the things that I was involved in within FISD was the digital rights management concept that both JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs tried to implement, which was trying to digitize or codify in computer language some of these terms and conditions. Because again, where this problem manifests itself, if you put to one side whether you agree or disagree with the contract, because I think there's a lot of disagreement about the contractual terms. But if you just push that issue to one side and it's purely about understanding and complying, I think to your point about the middlemen who are the market data teams talking to the business, when you're talking about big entities, really big entities like Goldman's and JP Morgan and whatever, the market data teams are fending off hundreds of queries from the business, and they somehow wanted to be able to automate that in some way. And I think they have struggled over the years to do that. It's interesting. You're going to be over in Amsterdam. First time I haven't been to one of the Dutch events for many years, and you've got my very good friend Alan Ross on one of your panels. panels, and Alan's been doing something recently. I confess I haven't spoken to him recently to understand all the nuance of what he's been up to. Where are we at with this issue? Have we solved it? Has anybody solved it? Has Alan solved it? Do you see a solution out there, or are we still wading through the problems?
So I think there's a few streams here that you can go. One, first of all, you talk about the DRM, and that in a way was, although those firms were looking for automation, they were still discussing it from a human point of view. And, we've now got Gen AI in the world, which whether people love it or
Yeah.
like, or hate it, it's here. And that can do many things. So that's not so much on the contractual side, but it does agentic AI, which is the panel we're going to have in Amsterdam. I mean, we're talking more about how firms cope with data compliance in a way. And so you've got a contract that will say ABC, but it might as well be in a foreign language to us. Whereas agentic AI has the possibilities to just, reread that and put it in its own language, but also beyond that it does that with the data as well, right? So we've got the issue, or we will, I don't think anybody has spoken out aloud, but I'm sure people are thinking about it, is IPR.
Yeah.
When is it your data and when is it my data? So I think with agentic AI and some of these ways that it comes up with an end value that you can't even prove the original source, I think a lot of things get lost. So I think in one way, one problem that's going to happen is how does a data provider protect their data? This is a big fear, of course, right? And so there's no, I understand it, but it's also a bit stupid. So we always talk about collusion in our industry, and
Yeah.
that's and within the FISD parameters, and very sensibly that it's not permitted. But we have like going on at the moment, and maybe I'm moving subject slow, but the RCB, reasonable cost basis, and exchanges cannot discuss with each other what are the best methods
Well,
to come up.
because you've put your finger on it. Bizarrely, that whole concept where collusion under various competition laws and antitrust laws, entities are not competitors. People who are peers are not allowed to compare notes and collude.
Yeah,
But in essence, when we go back to what you were saying about standards, if you actually translate that into practice, what you're asking is you do want these entities to collude. You, as the customer, want collusion in a bizarre way.
but
Although,
I'm not an IPI lawyer, but I believe that when we talk about collusion, it is used in a negative way in terms that
uh,
you shouldn't be using it to like
to
take
hurt.
business or to hurt. Yes,
Yeah,
right. And
that's my,
this is
yeah.
a complete opposite. We are not trying to hurt. We're actually trying to help an
I
industry.
know, and it's a tricky one, and we're not lawyers, so let's triple underline that you and I are not lawyers. So what we say might have no legal merit, but as laymen trying to understand this, you've got this concept of cooperation. Cooperation is good. My simplistic, and I'd love any lawyers to comment on this. My simplistic understand the difference between cooperation and collusion is collusion is a form of cooperation, but it's where you're colluding. You're saying, okay, let's gang up, let's do something, and if we
Mm,
agree, then those nasty customers won't be able to do anything about it. We'll screw them.
exactly.
It'll really
Exactly.
that's collusion in a very simplistic
Yes.
sense. But look, I'm just going to pull this back a little bit because I think
Sure.
we've done a natural segue. I mean, I think when we're talking about the complexities and the diversification of data licensing contracts, which we were talking about, which frankly isn't solved. You had a valiant effort to translate, but it was. But actually, when we're now talking creeping into AI, we're exacerbating the problem because you brought up intellectual property rights, and you brought up the fact that you can't necessarily track back, where generative AI and agentic AI are doing things with this data. It's even more difficult to potentially comply because in a sense what you're talking about is derived data in the
Yeah.
old terminology, and I think the industry as a whole, most of the providers of data have not quite worked out how to phrase their data licensing terms to protect their intellectual property in respect of AI. I think the whole world has
Well,
just not
they
worked out how
they
to
they
do
are
that.
attempting to phrase it, and they're all doing it differently,
Yeah, again,
right?
and not
Um,
maliciously different. They're all,
no,
yeah. I mean, they're all
well, yes and no, but
okay. Okay.
that's right. But
I like to look on the positive side.
yeah, I mean, everybody needs each other. Let's not forget that, right? And there is a purpose, and I think that everybody should be trying to do reasonable business. But you know, if you create super reliable, timely data, you deserve to have premium fees, you know? But the 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 problem with writing contracts is that if you can't apply it, then it will never be actually controlled within a customer environment. What is the point? I've heard stories of somebody say, turn around and say to a vendor, if we applied this policy to you, could you handle it? And they were like, no. And I was like, so why would you give it to your customers? And I think that's the point, is that it's great being creative, and maybe the end goal is, you know, commercial value, ROI, but it needs to be truthworthy for, you know, to be
No,
read by a customer.
I,
It's you know, and that's why audits end up so messy. They're just negotiations in a Turkish bazaar, because you'll argue about terminology, you'll argue about, you know, definitions and what counting and what not counting. So, I mean, we are a $1 billion industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we can't get our act together. That's ridiculous. And that's why I go back to communication, that we are not collectively working as a group. Don't get me wrong, this gives great opportunity for consultants, for associations like us, like FISD. It creates great
well,
debate.
I mean that is the positive. I mean, it gives
But there
us
is a lot
something
of
to talk
there's
about
a
on a
lot of
pod.
fatigue. There's a lot of fatigue in our industry,
I
and
know.
it's also what why people, you know, leave our industry. Um, but also, and like you say about positive, you know, when I look at this in a positive way, that's why I call market data a sport. It is a sport. It's you know, it's basically uh, yeah, survival of the fittest.
Juggling and swerving and yeah. I mean,
I'm wondering when market data will become an Olympic sport.
well, and you and I would be up there for gold,
I'd
definitely.
I'd I'd be doing a Monty Python version.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and just dwelling on the AI side, because I think there's at least two strands to the AI. I think we tucked on the idea of if AI is being applied to incoming data and doing clever things with it, and then the owners of that data lose sight of their intellectual property and can't get paid a reasonable return. That's one problem. I suppose one opportunity is the automation side, because that's where AI. I mean, again, it's slightly frightening. You know, I've read all these reports about will AI replace so many entry level jobs. I mean, there's a lot of data management stuff which is rote. You know, you're just doing the same things, and some junior person is doing that, and AI will be able to sort of replace that. So I think that's something that any parting thoughts before we move off AI? Because again, I think we've got conversations about our big conference that we're going to run in Copenhagen, WIFIC, and I think the observation is we could spend weeks just talking about AI, but AI isn't the only thing out there.
Well, my parting thought is that as one door closes, another one opens. So, in terms of some manual work that may dry up, it will give opportunity for other type of work, of, you know, maybe people who are, remember, AI, the danger of it is always, is the data properly validated? And
Yeah.
so I think it will create other jobs in terms of
And
controllers.
higher value jobs that the jobs will get pushed up the value chain, if
Yes, you're
value
basically
pole.
using, you know, like old years ago, where a farmer would crop his field, and then the horses, and then all of a sudden, once they built the machinery, you had the combine harvests and things. And it's the same thing that's happening in every industry, is that, you one day have a manual job, and then that eventually gets automated, and then the job that's available is something at a higher level. So I think that creates new opportunity, and I do think that also it's a natural evolution and fit that the youngsters of today, they
Yeah.
don't want to do manual labor. They want to do things with computers and that, because that's what they've grown up on.
Well, let's shift the conversation because I mentioned regulation, and I remember seeing one of your events in Frankfurt, another event. DORA was one. Was that? I've forgotten what DORA stands for. Digital Operation
Resiliency Act.
Act. Yeah. And then you mentioned RCB, the Reasonable Commercial Basis, which is all to do with consolidated tapes and whatever. I mean, what's your take on where we're at? What are the hot and important regulations that you see being talked about, worried about, dealt with? What's your take on that?
Well, let me just say up front again, not a lawyer. Um, I'm not an expert on regulation, so I just look at regulation from an operational point of view. And in a simplistic term, I think most regulation is written with good intentions,
But
but
the road to hell
boy,
is
do they
paved
mess it
with good
up.
intentions.
I mean, I think they are looking at the market data and say, "Oh, let's just copy one of their contracts." Because if you take Dora, it was so unclear, but also it needed the community to work together. And I know some firms that are still working
Well,
on
I mean,
Dora.
what's your simplistic understanding? If somebody never heard of Dora, what is Dora? That's a bit of an unfair thing, but just get a
Well,
very high level.
basically, it's consistency of making sure that what is of higher value to you, where you rely on a daily
Data.
basis or a
Yeah.
regular basis, that it stands, operational all the time, and it doesn't just fall down.
So it's
Um,
resilient. It's
but it is,
resilient.
yes, because if there's any delay to the market, that could create, I don't know, some unfair situation, or it could have impact on the end retailer, etc. Then, that it's come about because we're getting so clever with technology, and that regulation always needs to slow us down a little bit to say, like, while you seek all the opportunities, you've got to be aware of the risks. So with all the how do you call it, all the criminal activity, the fraud, and the can't think of the word, but where anything, again, said in the cloud, can be tampered with, that there needs to be in
Cyber
more
security and all
cyber
that.
security and more stronger, protection, etc. Um, and on one hand, it's correct, and it will strengthen the industry. On another hand, when I first read it, I was like, but do they think the industry is stupid? We've been operational resilience has been something going for 20 years in terms of what we would generally call BCM, business continuity
But I
management.
remember in your Frankfurt event, was that a year plus ago, the guy from LSEG was saying, look, we're doing all this, but this is common sense, and actually it shouldn't be onerous because actually you would think we'd all be doing this. This is really just ticking boxes in a good
Yeah,
way that it
yeah.
proves, and if somebody for some reason isn't, then they should wake up and get ready. Where anybody in a sensible, responsible organization should be doing this anyway.
Because interestingly enough, again, when I first came into market data, and I had come from sort of custody background, SLAs, service level
Yeah.
agreements, and these type of controls were standard. I go into market data and say, so if we're having data delivered, are there, these type of controls? And they went, "Pff, no, we don't have SLAs in market data." Um, so Dora, in a way, is at least addressing one element, and it is a form of SLAs, because in a lot of contracts, um, there are no guarantees about delivery and timeliness and escalation and all these things, which are standard in a custodial business. There's proper escalation protocols. Um, so I think. this is addressing a little bit of those things of reliability of data, protecting data. So it is good intentions, but how they then, went about saying how it should be integrated and everything and organized. So I know that a lot of customers were, told, from their risk groups that we must have this in place. But there was a reliance on your service provider. And there was, I don't really want to say out loud, but there were a couple of firms that were very, very good. And but many others were quite relaxed about it and said they would do it in their own way, in their own time, which wasn't very helpful. So regulation always brings hiccups in our industry. I think there is superior amounts of money that is spent to make sure firms follow regulation, but it costs them a lot of money because it's done in such an inefficient way from all sides of the table. And sometimes you think, like, what a waste of money. It's necessary, because you don't want to be penalized or lose your reputation, etc. But yeah, it's a pain.
I mean, I observed over the last many years that one of the areas where firms, customer firms that we're talking about, could spend money was complying with regulations was one thing, and then a segue into something we haven't talked about yet: cost reduction. Cost reduction. If anything, you could
But
spend
what's
money.
that, David? I've never heard about that in our industry.
well,
Nobody's
let's.
talking about it.
I know. Let's talk about it, because I mean that has been a theme. I mean, I was in the industry a little bit earlier than you, in the '80s, when money was being spent like it was going out of fashion. There was a lot of innovation. The banks were throwing money at stuff to get competitive advantage. And then I don't know when it all changed. After some recession or some crash or something, I can't track it back. But for a long time now, firms where you used to work, Rebecca, Aecon, Goldman Sachs, JP, all these firms that are buying stuff are incredibly focused on trying to spend less to reduce their cost base. I mean, what's your, I mean, what do you observe about that? Why is that? How does that manifest itself? What have you seen when you were actually working in those firms, and now that you're working in FISD, what do you see and hear from those firms now?
How long do we have, David? I'll give you a snapshot.
Yeah, again,
Um,
high level.
the high level is, I don't honestly believe that the majority of on the customer side have honest buy-in from the board and from the business. I had stood a couple of times in boards, asked by board members to come and present details about cost and how we can reduce. And you say, I don't like giving straight, closed questions as a yes or a no. I like to give choice to make people think more about that. Should we go low level, mid level, high level? So I gave different levels. And, you can be extreme. You can say, let's take desktop terminals. Are they all required? What are the reasons for it? I mean, I've done many times investigations on that. Do we need premium data, whether it's on credit ratings or indices? And do we need as many sources? You know, Basically, all the top cost items are shot down. No, we can't live without that. Oh no, we need that. I had one head of desk honestly say to me, "You can take my wife, but you're not taking my terminal." I was like, I wanted to say, "Well, can I inspect the goods first?" Uh, but I don't think it has full support. I think, credit to a lot of vendor managers, they take it to heart, because in the first half of my market data career, I treated every penny we spent like it was my own. I really, really did. And I wasn't happy if I came away with a deal that didn't meet my requirements. But I mean, cost containment is probably a better word than cost reduction. Nobody's going to reduce costs. We have inflation, which means all prices go up anyway. And regulation always requires more data. And then we have the new product range, always requires more data. How are we meant to be cost, cutting
So
costs?
it's containing the rise. In other words, the rise could be like that, and it's not, you're not going to reduce it, but you're just going to slow down or try and contain this
Yeah.
upward pressure. Is that what you think most of these users?
I think that is the more honest view. It's like so even when I say cost containment, I mean, perfection is like keeping your cost from this year the same as matching it with last year. But I think the more realistic is like keeping it within a certain margin of your previous year's costs. I mean, when some vendors come up and then they go, "Oh, we're going to we've increased all these different." Details and added, and so it's a far superior product. So we're going to charge you 20% more, and then you say, "Yeah, but I don't need that stuff. I'm just happy with my plain vanilla." I mean, then you are just working, you know, against the odds to try to keep your costs down.
But I mean
And
that's
yeah,
the
I was just
tension,
gonna say,
isn't it?
and
Because
that's why it's so important that vendor managements effectively, this is very important word, effectively communicate with the business. Not just tell them there's a price rise. That's lazy. There's a price rise. That achieves nothing. You need to make sure that there is an understanding of the total impact of what it does is if everything goes up, 10, 15% a year or in 2 years. I mean, one of the things that as working as a vendor manager for quite a long time, um, one of the things I observed is strategy and how you can touch, people's strings personally that they will actually do something. I think that is when you are executing perfect communication. Um, and I think you need to educate more, or not educate, because I'm sure the business will take that as a disrespectful, but communicate effectively.
articulate better and
Yes, yes.
clarify.
And funny enough, and this probably will go out after my event, but in Amsterdam, I've organized a consumer workshop. And one of the things on there is effective communication, and it's not so much outwards, it's more important inwards.
Yeah,
You know,
I
this,
mean,
this is another take that I pick up is that, halfway through my market data career and attending, consumer group meetings and things, some people, even after 20 years, are still bashing vendors. I'm like, and how has that helped? What have you achieved? Is what happened in year 5 different from year 10 or different from year 15? And when they say, not really, I went, so why do you keep doing it? Really, you need to turn to your attention where you have a chance of changing the decision. And so it's very important for vendor managers to again, effectively market their group, their capabilities, their watchful eye on bringing intel in and making it effective for the organization. And I think that's one area when I look at vendor management groups that there really are the mature teams and there are the amateurs, and they do exist,
because I mean, my career has been on the vendor side, and working in vendor firms, their whole thing is to grow. I mean, you mentioned that point about we just want the vanilla service. Well, most vendors, I would say all vendors, they're being told you've got to grow by 10%, 15%. Their shareholders are telling them just having the same turnover, having the same profitability last year is not acceptable. We want you to
yeah.
get better. So you've got this constant tension all the time. It's fascinating to watch. Look, Tristan, we are creeping to the end. There are a million things we could talk about. But as I said before we came online, I always give my guests, look, a couple of things that we haven't talked about: pet projects, pet thoughts, pet themes. What are Tristan Dehaan's sort of pet themes for 2026?
You mean in terms of what is going to be the talk of the town and the
Well,
developments and
yeah,
things?
just throw something we
Well, I
haven't
mean,
talked about that you
so
think is
so
important.
so Gen AI is just going to grow and grow and grow. It hasn't even developed its legs yet.
Yeah.
So I mean that's got a long way to go, and it's going to impact us in so many ways. And I think it will bring around a lot of changes. Maybe not this year, but certainly in the next 2 or 3 years. Um, What the other themes? I mean, regulation is just keep trying to catch up, and I just wonder what's coming next. I did make a prediction with a few colleagues that when Dora came out and was working through it, I said just like MiFID, there'd be a Dora too. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, that's another one. I've also noticed a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on,
All
uh,
right.
and that also on the consumer side, and especially here in the Dutch market,
What recent ones have there been in? I mean, obviously,
um,
big ones recent. Credit Suisse and UBS. That was on the bulge bracket side. Um,
well, I know that some firms are also doing massive staff cuts and
yeah,
reducing their capabilities, but as shops as their asset management businesses shrink, they become easy targets to be sucked up. Um, so we are seeing some newer firms come along. I mean, that's also a prediction. Again, I won't mention names, but there are some technology firms that are almost ready to come and step in and shake things up. And yeah, I think that will happen.
I and I I see that as well. Although a slightly negative observation, and in fact, your preceding podcast, Fergal O'Sullivan, who was the episode that goes out on the first Tuesday of February. You're going out on the first Tuesday of March. It's this concept of big versus small vendors. The idea that small, up and coming vendors with clever ideas and great products. Problem is, a lot of customers are very conservative, very risk averse, and they're much more inclined to just,
Yeah,
oh yeah, it's a great idea, but I'll stick with my big vendors because I sort of the devil I know, and also I'll use you as a stick to beat my big vendors, and the big vendors, oh go on, I'll drop the price a bit, or I'll throw in a few extra features. But small vendors, small
yeah, no,
companies,
absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Rudolf Sibo.
yeah,
As we both know him very well,
from
and
the German Buy Side Association, yeah.
exactly, a very knowledgeable gentleman and very shrewd. And I always love my conversations with him. I'm always learning stuff. Um, and he definitely is one of those people shouting from the rooftops. Is that you should be buying from those smaller players, and where
Nurturing
they're
them, nurturing them.
exactly helping them to grow, because that they then can become a worthy substitute. Um, but as I said before, when you try to reduce costs internally and say, "Oh, do we need these premium products?" Well, yes, because it's so important to the client. I went, "Is it?" I question that. Who is actually going and talking to the clients and actually saying that? I do wonder sometimes, if we're talking about if you it's a little bit like the Pepsi challenge, the old Pepsi Coke they did many years ago. If you blindfolded yourself and took a sip of each, would you notice the difference? I think that's the same on many other products, credit ratings, index.
There's a
Some
lot of
people may disagree with me, but exactly, it's
brand
about the
credit.
brand. And I say, what is so important about the brand? Again, it's a little bit like the clothing industry. Some people may say, oh, I love Hugo Boss and I don't know, something else. And then you go,
Yeah.
do you realize that's built in a factory in the in some extreme place where they build products for Aldi or Lidl or something, so
No,
it's
I mean,
it's
I would further observe. I think it's got a lot harder because the customer base has also become so concentrated on these mega companies, these bulge bracket firms. I mean, when I started my career in Telerate 41 years ago, we were selling to hundreds of different banks. There was a lot of opportunity to duck and dive it because you were dealing with smaller entities. Now, when you deal with these mega entities, if you get a deal with a Morgan Stanley, a Goldman Sachs, a UB, you've got to work blood.
because they realized it was the credit crunch, as you correctly mentioned. It was after that where business was very hard to come by, and therefore you had to reduce your expenses.
Yeah.
That is when market data teams started forming in organizations. When they started, instead of the business buying products, we needed to create a team that was responsible for this. That's where a lot of the companies created market data teams, and there was centralization of expenses. And to be honest, that's the correct thing to do. You should always do that. If you want to control something, then you have to take it serious. But I don't think it's being supported properly. But I call them my peers because I used to work as a consumer vendor manager, and also, one of the things I do is I facilitate the CCG group in FISD, and I listen to some people and I think they're amazing. There's some amazing people; they do all the right things, and I get really frustrated for them that they're not properly supported, and I'm like, yeah, well, what more can you do? So you're trying to keep the wolves from the door, and but it's not always supported.
As you said,
I
I
know,
think,
yeah, I know. So the one last thing I want to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
a very wise man said to me, and he actually he's a dear friend to me, is Steve Listhouse from Wells Fargo. And so when we first met, I realized this gentleman knows a lot and is very intelligent. And he taught me recently when we was having a discussion about market data. He said, what I think, and I echo, I agree with him 100%. For most people in market data, but especially if you work as a vendor manager, you should always teach people to remember the 3 C's:
Okay.
to care about the outcome, to be curious, to ask questions, to get to the real lever, what triggers everything, and to be creative on finding alternative choices. Those are the
I
3
think
C's. I think
I
that should
agree
be.
with you. He's a
Yeah.
wise man and dazzlingly handsome as well, I might add in. Just in case Steve's watching or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, send the paycheck to the same
Yeah,
place.
exactly. Look, Tristan, it has been a pleasure. We talk a lot offline, but it's a pleasure to
And I
have you.
can't even believe we didn't speak about the chocolate teapot, but we'll
Well,
leave that
we'll
as a
we'll
cliffhanger.
leave that
But
for
people
another.
we will know if they've listened because they'll be asking, what's this chocolate
The
teapot?
chocolate teapot and
Yes.
our false moustaches. That's we didn't talk about that. When Tristan and David tried to do a double comedy act at a Whiffig and failed miserably.
About a
Uh,
serious subject as
about
well.
it.
Let's be
Anyway,
close.
Tristan, a pleasure. I'm going to end the recording shortly, but thank you, thank you, thank you. Stay on the line to upload. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.